Okay, welcome. February 12th. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are. We've got Don Beck from Martha's Vineyard, and we're going to find out what makes Don tick. Oh, got to let Mickey in. Okay, so first question, Don. Now, okay, as a square dance caller, author, engineer, and especially good all-around husband, what's your next goal?
To continue living for another 20 years.
Okay.
I refuse to admit that old age is catching up.
Uh, well, it's just older. It's not old age. You're just older. Okay.
Actually, it's to continue doing all those things you said. Live
Ex-
longer so that I can continue doing all those things you said.
Okay, that's good. Okay, although you've retired from many of these things, you still seem to be pretty busy in the square dance field. And why do you do that?
Why not?
Okay.
It's as with most of us, square dancing is an addiction. And since I'm not in a position where I can dance or call very much lately, and I Zoom instead.
Okay. I
That's
guess.
a call written by Gus Green.
Oh, that's
Did you
right.
did you know Gus? He lived in your area.
Yeah, yeah. He wasn't too far from me up in north of Syracuse, New York,
Yeah,
and then he moved down to Fort Myers area. And but he didn't call down there. He was quite a drill sergeant of as far as callers go. Interesting guy.
I didn't know him.
Uh, Interesting. Yes. Um,
But we digress.
yes, we do. So when now one of the poll questions I suggested for Don, and he obviously didn't do it, was question number one, or uh, it was two. I don't know if it was two lies and a truth or two truths and a lie, but whatever it was, one of the options was I wrote a book about site calling called Sightless. Okay. And then two was, I don't remember what the second one was. Anyhow, he did write a book called Out of Sight. Okay. Now I want to know when the revised book Out of Sight is due for release, and tell us how long it took you to get the first one off the presses.
The first one, once I started with pen and paper, took 7 years to get it back from the printers. Um, then about 2 or 3 years of not having it. The second printing was actually the second version because I added some 30 pages. Run out of that one. The first printing was 1,000. The second was 100. I run out of that one. Um, I'm working on some additional stuff, but it looks like the third printing is going to be just the same one because there's some demand for it, and I'm investigating printers for that. And then there will be a revised version a year after that. Who knows?
Wow. Yeah. If
But I'm amazed
go ahead.
that there's still demand for that silly thing.
Well, um, Larry Marchese just posted on Facebook thing saying that back in '84 he got the book and it revitalized his whole concept of calling and everything, and he used it for the next 7 years. So obviously, I'm participating in one of Don's what do you call it sessions, tutorials on that
Zoom classes.
Zoom session. Yeah, it's um, I find it is very interesting. Uh, And if I were starting out, I think that's the kind of thing I would do is use that method. Um, so anyhow, oh, so uh, now y'all know that Don was a mechanical engineer, so he he is not like an artiste where I could ask him a very simple question and he could expound for hours. He's a mechanical engineer. You ask him a question, he's going to say in 4 letters or less the answer. So I've tried to make questions that force him to dig deep into his soul, his life. Okay, so here it is. Give me the Coles version for your school history.
I'm sorry, the what version?
The Coles Notes version. You know
Notes
what that
for,
is? That
well,
that's
in
like,
two words,
yeah. Oh,
in two words, no, in two letters, no, in three letters, yes, and in more letters, it would be maybe. But um, you were talking about what?
your school
Mechanical,
history.
mechanical education,
No,
grammar school?
well, I actually start at the beginning, Don. Did you do
Sumner Avenue
kindergarten?
School in Springfield, Mass.
Okay.
No, actually another one. Well, I went to another school when we moved when I was in kindergarten, so I don't even count that one. Anyway, college wise, I went to Springfield Public Schools, Springfield, Massachusetts. College wise, I went to RPI, Rensselaer Polytechnic
Polytech.
Institute in Troy, New York. I got a bachelor's of mechanical engineering. Spent 2 years being a tourist in the Pacific, floating around in the Pacific on an aircraft carrier in the Navy. Came back, went to work, and was kind of bored, needed some more mental stimulation. So I went after, that was a little bit after that, but I started evenings after I moved to the Boston area, going to Northeastern, got a master's in mechanical engineering. And eventually I got into square dancing and square dance choreography, and the mental boredom went away and I didn't have to go back to school anymore. I had mental stimulation with all that other good stuff.
Ah,
Does that answer your question?
that's
Almost.
good. Yes. That's a nice short version. Uh, did you build any bridges?
I burned a few behind me, but no, I haven't built any bridges.
Okay.
My engineering career was hydraulics and pneumatics, hydraulic and pneumatic systems and system design, system and component design.
Okay. Yeah. That's interesting that you went to RPI. I did a square dance for that college one time, and it was when they first started with the computers, and the whole building was nothing but a computer building, and all the computer stuff was downstairs. I knew nothing about it. And after about a half an hour, I asked one of the kids, I said, "What is it humming always going on? It's so hot in here." He said, "It's the computers." He took me down there, and it was just wall after wall of these big monster machines. Also, for you callers, don't don't try to compete with kids uh, on energy, because I called for a good 45 minutes to them. They got up through mainstream at that point. And then at that point, I said, "Okay, well, let's take a break." And one of the kids turns around and looked at me. He said, "Why, are you tired?" I said, "No." And I worked for the next 2 hours, and boy, I'll tell you, they were good. So yeah, I couldn't compete with them. Anyhow, so we got realizing where you live, and everybody knows you're on an island with limited full-time residents. What have you done in the square dance in this square dance hotspot to get square dancing going?
I've done nothing to get it going. I've done several things to try to get it going. I moved here, which, in case you don't know, is an island 5 miles off the coast of Massachusetts. Moved from the Boston area where I was calling 4 or 5 nights a week. And down here, there was some contra dancing. There's still a live band that used to call for them, but most of them, there aren't any contra dances anymore. They'll do a party dance now and then. I have tried to start a group probably half a dozen times in different venues, different groups, and have not been very successful. As I like to tell people, I'm a good caller, a good teacher, and a terrible organizer. Uh, but someday maybe. If
Yeah.
I get ambitious again, because I miss the actual calling.
If you don't know, by the way, folks, it's Martha's Vineyard, and what's the year-round, not the summertime, but the year-round residency population?
When we moved here 25 years ago, I used to say it was around 15,000, but I think it's up to 20,000 now. Um, I think it increased during COVID, during the pandemic, because a lot of people, New Yorkers, et cetera, that had summer places here have chosen to stay here year round, and work
Mm-hmm.
online like we're all doing now. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's the summer. We have 6 towns here. Our town is almost up to 1,000. It was about 700 or 800, I think.
Wow.
Um, in the summer, the island sinks a little due to the overcrowding of people, but around 100,000 here in the summer.
Oh my. Okay. So it's gonna sink. Okay. Well, that's I don't know if that's good news or not, but that's one way to retire. You know, I've got to go to one of the polls for this next question because we want to find out about how you got into square dancing or whatever. So I'm going to go to the one poll here. I forget which one it is though. Darn. Um, I, I've just got a quick look at my magic thing here. See if I can find. I'm gonna find where you gave me the questions, Don. Okay, here we are.
That was the hard part of trying to guess some questions, but
I know, isn't it?
yeah,
I could tell you. This
I'm
is
not good
Don.
at mine.
This is Don. His first sentence to me was, even though I'm not totally happy with the survey thing here, here are some questions for you. Okay,
We're supposed to
so
read that.
he's doing this under protest. Now we can blame at McAtee because she suggested we do these polls like this, and I think they're
What?
great. What? Didn't you?
Don't blame me.
I think well, I'm giving you credit. I think.
Oh, I see. Well, then that doesn't call blame, right?
Well,
I don't see you on
well,
screen. Where are you?
Don might think so.
Oh, there you are. I see you.
Okay, now here I've got to find out. Oh, here it is. The last one. No, no. Um, the third one. Let me go to the third one. Launch. See if this works. Okay, here we are. Question one. The first time I square danced, I was pushed and pulled in, and I can't see the rest of it. Pushed and pulled into a square by friends, and he put friends in italics, of course. And then the next one was in gym. We were told that if we peeked through the cracks in the sliding partition, that we would be made to square dance with the girls. And
They asked. No, I won't say anything. Go
okay,
ahead.
and then the third one is I never did take square dance lessons. So y'all vote for what you think is the the truth.
Do I get to vote?
I don't think so. I don't know. You're co-host. You can
No, but you
try.
have to explain yourself afterwards, Don.
Oh,
Yep, that's it. Oops. Oh, there's still votes coming in. Now, this is not the kind of thing that you can contest and say that the voting has been rigged or the machines are compromised or you're really the governor of Texas or Arizona. None of the above.
Jeffrey, Joe, you're dropping in now.
Okay, I didn't even hear what you said there. Can you say it again?
Yeah, you're dropping in and out of internet there.
Yeah, it did seem like it was going back and forth. Okay.
you
I'm
couldn't
gonna,
hear it. We couldn't hear you.
no, okay. I'm going to end the poll now and we're going to see what the deal is here. Share the results. Here we are. Okay. Okay. Well, it looks like the first time you square dance, you were pushed and pulled, and that's how you got involved. Okay. So I'm going to stop the sharing and we're going to find out from Don what the truth is.
So was this, I thought it was supposed to be two truths and one lie.
Okay, let's find out
But
what the lie
but as I
was.
told as I told you as I put in a little note for you on this
Yes.
particular question, they're all true.
Yeah.
Lie that there's a lie there. Um, the first one, I was watching a square dance at an island in Lake George in New York State, a traditional dance, not contras, just traditional squares, and enjoying watching it, had no interest or urge to go. And some woman came out to the sidelines and said, "My partner just left. I need a new partner. You," or pointed at me and my friend. And he said, "Well, I've already danced one." So he pushed, she pulled. I protested, but almost instantly got hooked. The 1958, maybe.
Oh, yeah.
The second one was in gym class in junior high school. It was one of these gyms that had the sliding door partition to cut it in half, and the boys stayed in one half and the girls stayed in the other. And the instructor, the gym teacher, it was sort of a crack between them, and the gym teacher threatened us if we peeked through the crack between the two sliding partitions to watch the girls, they'd punish us by opening the doors and making us square dance with them. That was before my square dancing introduction, but I figured in retrospect that was a great way. Square dancing was a punishment. The last one, I never took square dance lessons. I started with traditional and then got dragged into a group here, and then somebody in a traditional group said, "Well, you seem to know what you're doing." Oh, no, I guess it was in California. I was a friend of mine from back east when we both graduated, college friend. He said, we used to do traditional dancing together. And he said, "I'm going to my square dance lesson tonight. You can come along, but you can't dance because this is different than the stuff we used to do." And that was fine with me. I was sitting on the sidelines and they needed one more guy for a square. And the caller's daughter, Saints and Spinners in Oakland, the caller's daughter came over to me and said, "Can you dance?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Well, can you do a grand right and left?" And I said, "Yes." And she dragged me in, and so I picked up things on the fly there. But whenever my ship was in port, I used to go with them, even went out to a few dances. And then eventually getting out of the Navy, going back to the East Coast, I was at a traditional dance at Smith College, and one of the kids there from Mount Holyoke College said, "You look like you can dance. Why don't you come to the Haymakers Club at University of Mass," which was a Western club. And so I started dancing with them. And then you learned one call at a time as they were invented. But I never took formal lessons.
Well, actually, I guess back in those days, Don, we only had about 13 calls, didn't we?
No, there were a lot more than that.
Okay, no, I'm just teasing you.
At least
Um,
15, but
um, the process was a whole lot different. We did a lot of circles and stars. I remember that. A lot of swings. You
well,
would swing.
there were a lot of clubs at that time that did give lessons and everything.
Mhm.
And when I went with other kids from the University of Mass Club, from the Haymakers, we used to go out dancing elsewhere. And people used to say, "Well, where'd you learn?" And I'd say, "I never did." And they sort of back off. I mean, it was the regular scene at that time, even though it was a more limited number of things. And at that time, dancing was so much fun. I didn't mind dancing with all these old fogies that were in their 30s. And as I got to be in my 50s, it turned out most of the dancers I was dancing with were still a lot older. Past the 50s a while ago. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No. That's fine. You just keep on talking. I'll listen. Um, so how did you meet Gail?
At a dance,
Oh, well, go figure.
at a traditional dance, at a contra dance. When I rediscovered the modern contra dance scene, um, I I really loved dancing contras. I felt contra dancing, and I still do, was very physical and emotionally satisfying, whereas Western was mentally satisfying. And by calling Western and dancing traditional contras, I got the best of both worlds and met Gail at one of the contra dances I went to. Actually, I met my first wife at one of the traditional dances I went to way back when, and also, but
Bit of a
people
pattern
used to
then.
say when you're, yeah, I mean, people used to tell me, you're you're interested in dating women. Why don't you go to a bar? There's plenty of good women there. And I said, because I don't want to date a woman that goes bar hopping. I'd rather date women that go square dancing.
Oh
And
my.
it's worked for me.
So how long did it take for you to pop the question? Hmm.
I don't,
Oops.
from when we started dating till when we got married, 2.5 years. And I don't remember when during that point I popped the question.
Oh, okay.
What question?
Yeah, you have a question. Yeah, right. Yeah. It sounds like, do you wanna? Um,
Yeah, the question of do you want to learn Western square dancing?
yeah, right. That was it.
That was actually, she said, since we're going to this New England Square Dance Convention in a few months anyway, I should learn how to dance mainstream.
Oh, wow.
And so I got a square of dancers in the basement, including my daughter and Gail and 6 regular dancers. And I taught the mainstream that evening, and that was it.
That's the way to go. Shouldn't we all do that?
No, it's not.
So, so you're going all these dances and not getting out to the bars. How did you get? Um, how did you get into calling?
There, I hear a lot of people say, "Oh God, I danced," and the second time I was there, I figured I got to do the calling. I got to get up on stage. Well, it wasn't that way for me. I felt you had to be born that way. I had no interest at all. But while dancing at the Haymakers at UMass, their caller was a guy named Hal Beck, no relationship whatsoever. Um, but the club was going to do a demo someplace, and Hal couldn't make it. So one of the students, the club had a nice collection of records that they brought regularly. One of the students said, "Oh, I'll memorize one of the singing calls and I'll call for you. Do a singing call for the demo." I didn't go to the demo. That's not my thing, although I've been to some. Um, and I guess he did. And the following Tuesday, he insisted on doing his one singing call for the club. And the Tuesday after that, he insisted on doing the same singing call for the club. And he was terrible. He was really bad. And that's when it hit me that, excuse me, that my goodness, if he can call, anybody can. So I borrowed a singing call. And and everybody, it was amazed me. I mean, first of all, everybody cheered and said how wonderful I was. And I think that was because in comparison to the other guy. But for me, it was, I remember a couple of things. One, you say jump and they jumped. The power that came with that. Um, and the other thing, when I'd been calling this in my head over and over again for a week, um, the dancers in my head were doing it at the same time I was calling. I had no concept of the 2-second delay for them you've got to tell them what to do before they can. And watching that happen in real life for the first time was kind of a shocking experience. But so because of it being a good experience, I borrowed a different record. And so I did a different record every week instead of the same one this other guy did. And eventually I was doing a bunch. Now, you knew Jerry Carmen, if I'm not
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
correct.
Rochester. Yeah.
And Jerry was also in the club there at the Haymakers. He was a student at UMass. And he had started calling before I did. And he was really good at patter, not too good at singing calls. And so he and I did several dances together where he did the patter and I did the singing call. Some of them were party nights. Some of them I think were clubs of some sort. I did nothing but singing calls for the first 2 years. Patter, again, came easy to Jerry, at least it seemed to me. I thought he'd been calling a lot longer than I had until we talked about it years later. But Patter came easy to him. It was a total mystery to me until I was forced.
Oh, everybody's froze. Uh-oh. Everybody's froze on my side. Whoops. I just lost Don. Oh, here we go. It's coming back. Oh,
I'm back. There he is.
He's in a different part of my screen. There you are, Joe. Put
Hey.
you back.
Joe, you're muted. It might help if you turn your video off. That might stabilize your internet connection there a little bit.
good idea. Yeah. Let's do that. Okay.
We can still hear you, but we won't have to look at you.
Oh, okay.
We love you, Joe.
Yes. Well, I clicked on Don's picture there, thinking that I could jar the computer back into service, and his screen just totally disappeared. So I thought, oh my God. Well, I'm in a resort here that the internet is iffy. I do have a hotspot in case I totally blow out of the water here. But anyhow, so yeah, so Don, keep on going about this, how you got into patter, because it's such an easy thing, patter.
No, it's not.
No.
I get into patter because sometime or other, there was a local teenage club, and their caller went away, and a club I'd been dancing with, they, I guess, were the parents of these teens, and they knew I did some calling and said, would I like to call for the club? And there was no way I could say no, but I had to learn how to patter, and I was just forcing myself to say stuff, and I didn't even know what I was doing at the time. The club folded shortly after, probably because of me, but it was on its way down before that. I mean, you said square your set, and there were 2 people on the floor, and the rest were in the men's and boys and girls rooms smoking or whatever they did there. But at least it made me try to do something. And then I got a square or 2 dancing in my basement so I could practice. And at first, all I did was read material that people had written for in Sets in Order magazine. There were sequences in there. Of course, I'd look through the sequences to see which ones contained only the calls my group knew, and would call those. Little did I know that the only reason they published those was because they weren't standard applications. They were interesting, unique ones. And I couldn't figure out why the dancers, even though they knew the calls, couldn't dance the songs. But well, I guess the eventually I moved to the Boston area, and a friend of mine called and said, we've been doing a lot of traditional dancing, but we hear there's this thing called modern square dancing and or contemporary or whatever you want to call it. And I'm trying to start a group of doing that. Do you want to join that? And we'll be doing this at MIT. This was the beginnings of Tech Squares. And I said, yeah, I'd love to join you, but under one condition. And he said, what's that? And I said, that I'm the caller. And he said, oh, you've learned how to call? And that was, so we did that. And while I was in the Boston area, my first job was working for Raytheon. And I found out that there was another gentleman working on the second floor as a technical writer. His name was Dr. Julius King, better known to the square dance world as J. King. And I walked upstairs and introduced myself and chewed his ear a bit, and went up about once a week and spent an hour talking with him. And one of the things he did was convince me I should buy a book called Fundamentals of Calling. And so I started reading that and learning about mental image calling, and it went on from there. And I could go on from there for a long time, but it's your turn, Joe.
Okay. Yeah, and as many of you know, Don has perfected. He's changed a little bit of what J. King did, and it's a very interesting way of calling, and it's, I don't know, I really don't know how to describe it other than it's, you only have to follow one person, and you know, using this method, you know where people are. I have the other method where I keep my eyes open and I see them on the floor. Doesn't mean I know what I'm doing, but anyhow, I am learning from Don this method. I don't know that I can use it because it's simple, but it's not necessarily easy. Okay. But
I think of it as easy to use, but not easy to learn. It just takes quite a while, but once you've learned it, it's easy. And it's more easy. It's easier for people that don't know any other method, really. Once you're an established caller, site calling or modules, it's easier to fall back on the other thing, but it's also interesting just to see that there are some ground rules that govern a lot of the stuff that we do. I learned from Jay, and I'd go up every week and say, hey, I got to this and this is cool. And eventually I got to a point where he'd say, well, that's not exactly what I meant, but if it works for you, use it. And I found out many years later that I got to a point that I extended his method. Many people just continued with it very successfully. Daryl Clendenin is or was on here a minute ago. He's one. Brian Hodgkins, very successful in Australia and Europe. Pretty much follows what Jay did originally. Dave Prescott in Germany has gone a little beyond too. But I got to the point where I was using it very successfully, knew it was time to move on to site calling and couldn't, because I couldn't let go of the mental image. So I finally, even though I knew all the principles of site calling and could do it, and wrote down my partners and corners, because that was the tough part for me. I didn't know what spin chain through did with mental image. So I would call a spin chain through, and that made me be lost. So then I had to finish by site calling, and I went on to site calling mostly. I did want to make another comment relative to that, but I won't, because I can't remember. Go ahead, Joe.
it'll come back to you in the most inopportune time. Okay.
Yes.
So how did your parents ever go to a dance of yours or hear you call?
They never went to a dance of mine. They couldn't help but hear me practicing singing calls in the bedroom, but I don't recall that Shay showed any positive or negative interest in it. I
Okay.
did have a lot of, when there were traditional dances in the area, this was mostly with outing club groups. I did have a lot of the outing clubbers come and stay, and my parents would host them and feed them breakfast and be very nice to them in that respect, but they never did come to a square dance.
Hmm.
And I don't recall ever asking them to either. It just was a different thing.
Yeah. Do you think they had any idea what you did?
No,
Long as it didn't involve smoking or drinking, I guess. What the heck?
yeah.
How would your friends describe you?
How would my friends describe me? You're going on the assumption I have friends?
Well, I wasn't going to say that, because I thought I can't be that bad.
Um, as a nerd, as an introvert, I don't know. Um, I love all the descriptions.
Not a Renaissance man necessarily, eh? Uh,
Excuse me.
he's tearing up thinking of his friends. Okay.
My eyes aren't, just my nose.
Oh, okay.
Very
Uh,
nose. Yeah.
well, how would you describe yourself? What kind of adjectives do you have?
How I would describe myself, or is how I would wish to be described by others.
No. That's a different question. That comes up later when you've had a few
Oh
more
dear.
drinks. Okay.
Excuse me, coffee time. How would I describe? I probably wouldn't. I mean, when you said that during the first interview, my first answer to myself was, I'd describe myself as me, but that's not very useful. Curious, imaginative, interested, quiet.
That's a good bunch.
I'm practicing the quiet right now.
Yeah. Okay. Being the extrovert you are, I'm going to put us on to another poll question here because there are, regardless of how you felt about them, they're interesting. But you're going to have to tell me whether so they're going to be two truths and one lie?
Two truths and one lie, and the others. That
Okay.
other one.
Okay, let's do that then. I hope this is you. Oh, here we are. Can you all see that? No? How do I? Oh, I gotta say launch. There we go. How's that? Okay. First one is in the 6th grade, I sang with a Broadway show that was traveling through town. I'm just trying to think. Oh, it would have had to be Oklahoma. They might have square dancing in that. The second possibility is in the 7th grade, I sang in the school glee club. And then the third one is in 8th grade, I sang on a local TV station. Okay, so it's getting kind of heavy on the TV station. And we're all voting for the. Okay.
Are people voting for the ones that are true or for the one that's false?
Well, let's hope for they're voting for the one that's false because it's two truths, one lie, and that way we get a good answer. So, which one is the lie? You don't think he sang in the 8th grade on TV? Whoops! Now they're changing it. 7th grade's looking good. Yeah. Don't forget, he could have sang in the back row. Nobody would see him. And he could mouth the words. So, that sounds good. Okay, well, we're going to end the poll.
These remind me of the questions you asked Patty Green last week. She sang all sorts of different places.
That's okay, yeah. Okay, there we go. So, which one? What about the 6th grade? Did you sing with the Broadway show?
Yeah. There was a Broadway show touring, was The Man Who Came to Dinner, starring Monty Woolley. In fact, I dug out the playbill. I don't know if you can see that. That I even got his signature. And every town they went into, there was a choir of 6 boys singing Silent Night at the end of the first act. And every town they went to the local school system to get people. And they got 6 of them, and one couldn't make it, so I was a runner-up from our school. And we did 3 performances, and I got paid $2 a piece for each of the 3. My first professional gig. It was quite the
Whoa.
deal.
What's that worth in today's money? $1,000?
I was thinking 350, but
That's good. I'll take that.
it seemed a lot worth it. It seemed pretty good to me at the time.
I'll bet.
Yeah, that one was true.
Okay. 7th grade?
That one was true also. I sang in the Glee Club for a year when I went to junior high school.
And were you forced?
No, I enjoyed singing.
I guess 7th grade you were looking for, it was a way to get near girls.
7th grade for me was a little early, and for me, looking for girls even 12th grade was early, but that's another story.
Jeez. Okay. So in the 8th grade you sang on a local TV station is the lie.
That is a lie. That is true. That is a lie.
That is okay.
I've heard of problems with double negatives, but double positives, that's
That's good. All right. So what was your ultimate goal to start with, say in high school?
I'm just remembering a joke when some teacher asked a kid, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And he said, "I don't know anything but an adult." I'm working on that. I was going to study mechanical engineering, and I was going to start a small company making something, although I was interested in electronics as well as mechanical. By the way, my mechanical engineering career went for 25 years, and I realized that wasn't for me. And then I went into all sorts of computer related things like sales and tech support and tech writing. And
Oh,
parallel to all that, I was a square dance scholar, and probably should have made that my profession, because it took years to realize it's okay to like the job you're doing rather than worrying about having to rely on it.
yeah. Yeah, you could have made big bucks. We all
I
do.
could-
I see Barry,
Some of you
Barry,
guys
o-
did.
Barry over there is grinning pretty widely. As a caller who has traveled mucho, you find out that, yeah, you might be getting $1,500 for that dance, but it cost you $1,450 to get there and back and buy food.
And it's not
Anyhow,
a weekly gig.
no, no, it's pure luck. No, it's not luck. Not luck at all. So that was your goal, but it took you 25 years to realize that there was something. Was there any else that you kind of surfaced and you thought, oh, I'd like to do that?
Square dance calling?
Okay, that would be it.
I can't really think of anything other than
Square dance.
mechanical engineering. Seemed like, well, in high school, was debating mechanical engineering versus electrical engineering, because I really enjoyed electronics as a hobby. And I decided I'd rather design things where I could see them moving rather than just somebody telling me they're moving inside wires, even though I couldn't see them. That's why I went mechanical. But as a mechanical engineering, understanding electronics was always a big benefit, because I was able to translate or come up with analogies between the mechanical engineering group and the electrical engineering groups and get them so they could communicate with each other. A lot of the electronics was eventually evolved into ham radio operator and that kind of stuff. So I'd have the mic in my hand before calling.
Okay.
Actually, it
Well,
was on a stand, but that's okay.
yeah, yeah, right. That sort of parallels the question of are you a sadist or a masochist? But I guess as a square dance caller, I don't know which one was which, I forget, but inflicting pain upon others is one of them. And I guess that I think that might be the square dance part.
You could look in a mirror and be both, I guess.
Oh, jeez. Okay, we're getting to his creative side, folks. This is good. What's the most important lesson you've learned over your career, uh, whether it be square dancing or engineering or whatever?
Well, in mechanical engineering, the most important thing I learned it wasn't for me, so I left it.
Oh, jeez.
um, I don't know. That was interesting because with being imaginative, having foresight, a lot of times when I would in meetings point out the that this is a possibility that this won't happen, not being positive, but just trying to not being negative, just trying to let people know potential areas we have to look out for. Everybody interpreted me as being negative, as being a pessimist. Um, and it wasn't until that maybe I would leave the group that they'd realize, oh, somebody's not here to point out the problems that are eventually going to for sure go wrong. But it was an interesting knowledge for me to try and remember and figure out how to be negative in a positive way. I'm not sure quite how to word that.
Ah, that sounds like
And
it sounds like a good attribute for a square dance caller for sure. Well, you get that dancer that can't do anything, right? So you have to say, boy,
you met him too.
yeah, I like your boots. Yeah, really good boots. Uh, okay, well, we'll move on to another one. I guess one of the questions, of course, a lot of people usually have is you know, people think of us as square dance callers and everything else, and that we put down the mic and we go home and we go in a closet. We're there until the next dance. And a lot of times this is why I think this kind of a session is good for dancers to find out that there's more to a caller's life than just calling. But so when there are stresses, whether it's coming from the square dance world or whatever, what do you do to kind of unwind?
Interestingly, for many years, when I used to drive home from a dance, I would think about that guy that had been on stage calling, and that was a different guy. I couldn't relate to be. I wasn't stressed out. That poor guy on stage may still have been stressed out, but I couldn't relate to being him. It took years to meld those two personalities. That it was really myself that had been up there. Um, I know it did take time to unwind a little when I got home, but right now I think of, oh my God, you get up to go to work in the morning, catch a quick bite of dinner, then drive off someplace for a dance. I was calling 4 or 5 nights a week, and contra dancing the others, and coming home, an hour, half an hour drive home from the dance, unwinding a little, getting to bed kind of late, and then having to get up the next morning to go to work. It was, there's no way I could do that these days. So again, I'm disassociated from the guy that used to do that. But um, one of the things about getting older is you forget things. I forgot what your question was, Joe.
Okay, I'm not going to tell you. Uh,
Oh,
it was no, no, no. It was how do you de-stress? What do you do to unwind? Like when you got home after a dance, would you go out skiing or would you read a book or have a beer?
I don't read books. I rarely drink beer, and at that age, I didn't at all. Um, I don't know, maybe turn the TV on a little bit, or who knows?
Oh,
Probably eat something. That was one of my favorite things.
okay. That's good. Well, us guys have that special box, of where it's called the nothing box, and your partner or your wife or your friend says, "What are you thinking?" And you say, "Nothing." That's your nothing box because guys can do that, right? Ye-
Well, Gail studied with the local Buddhist group on how to meditate for a while, and I tried that, and that's the art of really thinking of nothing, and it's very difficult to do. Um, so, although I did have something called a nothing box or a foo counter that something I made, I guess, post high school, but a box with a lot of neon lights and a battery inside, and they just flashed randomly. And you put it on the mantle, and friends would come over and ask what that did, and you said nothing, because it didn't, other than generate questions. But so when you say nothing box, I just have a memory of flashing lights.
Okay, well, that sounds good. In the square dance world, though, did you ever have any kind of embarrassing moments, like being on stage and your fly was down or whatever?
As occasionally I'd have an embarrassing moment and my mouth was open. Uh, Thinking you might ask that question, I keep remembering one particular one, and I've told this in other places, so hopefully it's not a repeat. But I was dating a woman who was very women's lib and politically conscious, not political, well, that too, but PC. And at that point, I went from calling my dancers boys and girls to men and women, and I was conscious of all that stuff. And as you all know, when you're a square dance caller, there's an awful lot going on at once, an awful lot. And I was calling a dance, I believe it was an Acton Mass for the Square Wheelers. We probably had 8 or 10 squares out there, which was, a reasonable group at the size. It wasn't small, but it wasn't big. And I was doing a singing call, and I said, "And the 4 little ladies chain across." And I realized little ladies wasn't quite PC, so I said, "And you big ones go too." Um,
Jeez.
at the end, that came out before I had a chance to think about it. At the end of the tip, why there were several women just lined up at the stage wanting to talk to me about having made a little bit of a mistake there.
Oh, jeez. Yeah, that's what happens when you call enough that you start. You're on automatic pilot, and you hear yourself, you know, chain the ladies over, chain them back, or and you say, and chain their front, and well, yes, we do have that situation happens. Um,
Thank
that,
goodness
and
for automatic pilot, though. There's some days you're just not up to it, and you can get away with an awful lot before you get into the groove. Um,
oh yeah,
After years of experience.
there are so many. The thing is, you don't want to think it because if you think a phrase or a word or anything that's bad, the next thing you know, it pops out of your mouth, and you think that was one of those I shouldn't have said.
One of my mentors, Jim Mayo, frequently said, "Think clean thoughts."
Good,
Um,
good
and I
point.
hate to say this, but I saw him calling at a club where he thought maybe they weren't going to like him, and you could tell he was thinking not as clean as they could because his dance came out differently. His thought his philosophy of think clean thoughts really worked.
Mm. Um, yeah, I had a question there. Wanted to ask you. Oh,
I
what
have
the
a
heck
I
was
have
it?
a answer to a question you've asked other people
Oh, okay.
because I think it's
Go
different.
for it.
But you ask, are you nervous when you go on stage?
I had that
And
next. That was my next question.
most people have said yes. And I've heard performers of other types saying you've got to have a little nervous edge there to get you on your toes. And I found it just the opposite. I have to relax myself and totally calm myself down and say they're just regular dancers out there. Because when I'm relaxed, I can do a much better job. When I'm nervous, I guess I'm not thinking clean thoughts. So I'm surprised everybody says that, because for me, I really have to calm myself down and build confidence before I get on stage.
That's interesting. Now, you see all the callers on the screen here, they're all thinking, yeah, I guess I'm going to have to try that. Well, I guess the thing is, once you start calling, once the first words start popping out of your mouth, you do get into it's not an automatic mode, but it's your square dance calling mode, and you know what to say. You're in control of your process then, and then the dancers are very you don't think about them being judgmental. Do they like my voice? Do they, am I wearing a clean shirt or whatever?
I relative to going into the calling mode or thing, I used to have pretty severe headaches about once a week, typically on Sundays, but not always. Probably a migraine of some sort. And there were times that I thought, geez, I better not, I don't know how I can call tonight. Well, it turns out when I started calling, the headache would go away. When I was driving home afterwards, it'd come back.
Yeah.
But getting in the calling zone would totally take over from that. So I learned not to worry about that.
Mm-hmm.
Calling was good for me in many ways. Temporary headache relief.
Yeah, I can relate to that. The migraines. And, you can, same thing with the dancers. Once you get everybody going, if they came in and they had issues or whatever, they do disappear because the square dancing does something different to us, which is great. Oh yeah, I wanted you to name drop. You mentioned Jim Mayo. I asked Jim to come on, and he declined. He said, he hasn't been in the square dance activity for a while, and there was age-related situations and whatnot. And a number of other callers have said the same thing. Um, they don't feel up to it. Okay, which is too bad because there's such a great history. Even if they came on and did 3 minutes worth of saying something, we would, again, we would learn so much from them. So what other names have you got to drop? Because you were in a really good area for the biggies.
Well, some of the callers that were well established when I was starting out in this area that are still calling pretty regularly. Well, I don't know if Red Bates still is calling, but Jack, not Jack Lastry. Jack O'Leary was a very popular caller at the time. Buzz Chapman he sort of dropped out, but he's in Houston area now, and he's come back in for the last couple of years. He will appear here and there. Clint McLean was big and has reappeared a little recently. And some of the big names that I was, one of the things I did was do a lot of dancing. I really enjoyed dancing. And also whenever a traveling caller came through, I would dance to him because I was curious what all these people were and learned a lot from listening. So they were, the local traveling callers were Earl Johnston, Al Brundage, and all the others. I can't think of them right now.
Yeah. Dot. Yes.
Yeah.
Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I felt really stupid when I went over to Massachusetts and called a dance. I don't remember where, and Al Brundage was there dancing, and I didn't even know him. I didn't even know how special he was at the time. And when I towards the very end of the dance, I found out, and I thought, oh my God, how have I been doing? But let me tell the rest of you, my first meeting with Don, he didn't even, it was so special. Don doesn't even remember. But I think it was my worst dance I ever called, I felt. It was for Johnson's Barn. And for some of us, that was, you had made it when you got to call for Johnson's Barn. Anyhow, and Don was there. And I just could not get my corners for beans. And I felt really badly about that. So I'm glad Don has a bad memory and does not remember that. Uh,
The barn, I didn't dance very often at Johnson's Barn. Called there a few times. There were others active barns. Johnson's one of the more active ones, but the one that was nearer to me that I called at, well, that I eventually called at quite a bit, danced a lot, was Baypath Barn. Did you ever get to call there?
yeah, I did once. Was that Tom Rinker had that eventually?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I did a number of dances there. That was, again, um, some interesting situations all around that. But so if you were writing an autobiography of so redundant, of yourself, duh, uh, autobiography, what would the title be?
I thought they called those memoirs these days.
Okay, what would its title be? You're not going to get out of it that easy.
The other Don Beck.
That Don Beck
If
nobody else knows.
if you Google Don Beck, you will come up with a guy who wrote a book called Spiral Dynamics, and he's more well known than I am. About my age, I once got a letter from an email from South Africa saying, "Are you the Don Beck that wrote Spiral Dynamics?" And I said, "No, but I wrote Out of Sight. Are you interested in that?" We went back and forth a little, but he had no interest. What would I call it? I
Yeah.
have no idea. What would you call it? My Life by Me. I can tell you how I named Out of Sight.
Okay. Do that then. We just
They
want to
say
hear you talk, Don.
it was a 7-year project, and I was mulling names in the back of my mind, the best name I could come up with. And if you know anything about the method, this will make sense to you. But I was thinking of calling it The Fine Art of Spot Moving, but that wasn't a winner. It describes what's going on there, but I have no idea what it, and all of a sudden Out of Sight came into mind, and that seems to have stuck. Now, if you Google Out of Sight, you'll see there are many books by that title, but they don't all refer to square dancing. I wanted once to write a book about sight calling, and I was going to call it Insight into Sight Calling. But I never got around to that. And I figure there's enough people that have enough knowledge about sight calling that I don't have to write that.
Well, I like the Shakespearean reference, about, I don't know how it would fit in there, but somehow in square dance calling, we need a call called out damn spot.
I think I mentioned that last Monday or something, or no, you're a Wednesday group, Wednesday or two ago. But this had nothing to do with square dancing. But I used to think of the old Dick and Jane books.
Oh yes.
Spot, here comes Spot. Spot, go outside. Out, damn Spot. If it were written by Shakespeare, never mind. I'm stealing your joke that you stole from me.
No. I want yours, but yours is better. So I got a bunch of things here. Have you ever jumped out of a plane?
Jumped off of a plane?
Yeah.
Not
Okay.
while
Out of a
while
plane.
it was in the air.
Yes, in the air. Yeah.
No.
Oh, okay. Have you ever flown in a hot air balloon?
No.
Have you ever scuba dived?
Yes.
Okay. Where?
St. Thomas.
Wow.
I was on a square dance cruise down there, and one of the things was they said if you want to go scuba diving, there's a tour where they teach you for half an hour or so, or an hour ground school, and then 15 minutes when you're up to your ankles or knees, and then you go scuba diving for 20 minutes. And I did, got it out of my system. It was fun, but it was one of those many hobbies that I didn't want to invest the money in.
Okay. Have you ever ridden in the front part of a locomotive?
Nope.
No. Have you ever danced on Broadway?
Nope.
Took a while for me to answer that, didn't it? Have you have you ever told a lie?
If I say no, that would be lying.
Okay. Okay. We won't go there. Have you ever ridden a motorcycle?
Yes.
Have you ever, well, I asked you, did you ever build a bridge? You said no. Have you ever worked in a factory?
Yes.
Okay. Last question. Well, wait a minute. We got to do this one poll here because this poll is good. Many of you do not know the real Don. How do we get to share polls? Polls.
I've never done pole dancing either.
Okay.
One thing that most people probably don't know, because it's not obvious, but one of the things I've always wanted to do was be funny. And I've learned that I'm not a natural comedian, at least not the level that can get people to laugh. I generally say things that I think are funny and people think I'm weird. So don't believe everything I say, including
Okay.
that.
So we go back to question number 7. Did you ever tell a lie? Okay. Done with that. Here's what I wanted to show as a poll. Okay. Okay, he says he climbed Mount Washington in New Hampshire. And of course, my first thought is Mount Washington in New Hampshire? Is he tricking us? Okay. I climbed Mount McKinley in Alaska. And I climbed Mount Fuji in Japan. Now, you got to know that Don was a mountain climber, rock specialist, other than rock star, Okay. So you got to figure out which one is the lie. Okay. Oh, oops. They're changing their ideas. Hey, you're supposed, like multiple choice, you got to pick. Answer C is always the one to pick.
None of the above.
None of the above. Yes.
Oh,
Okay.
that's answer D.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. We're going to end this poll and share the results. Okay. So they think that you never climbed Mount McKinley.
They're right.
Oh, no kidding.
It's 20,000 feet. What do you think I am? A mountaineer? I just did it as a hobby. Although Mount Washington in New Hampshire has the worst weather of anywhere in the United States. Although the 2 times I was up there weather was reasonable. I guess one time I didn't make the summit because the snow was too deep. But
Well, I like the one about, I read one time that they were having high winds in Mount Washington, and the last recorded wind speed was 250 miles an hour before the equipment was blown away. So I thought that was good. How about the Mount Fuji in Japan?
Yep, got to climb that.
Huh?
12,388 feet.
Wow.
Most people feel altitude problems at around 10,000 feet. I feel them at 8,000. So those last 4,000 were quite difficult. Fuji is not a technical mountain, but Fuji used to be the most climbed mountain in the world. Second most was Mount Monadnock in southern New Hampshire.
Oh, really?
I've only climbed that about 52 or 3 times. And generally 50 times in winter. It was an annual event we used to do, or my son and friends still do it. just go to the party afterwards. But now instead of Fuji and Monadnock being number 1 and 2, they're 2 and 3. Apparently there's some mountain in China that's more frequently climbed than them, but I don't think I'll take the time to go there and climb that one.
Did you complete the 49?
No, actually, in New York State, in the Adirondacks, there are 48 mountains over 4,000 feet. And in the White Mountains in New Hampshire, there are 48,000. There are 48 mountains over 4,000 feet. And a lot of people aim at getting all 48 of them, or one friend of mine's done the 100 ones, including the few in Vermont in winter. But I've done many of them, and some in winter, but really had no interest in peak bagging, as they say. I've enjoyed it as a hobby, not as a serious endeavor, and have climbed in Japan and have climbed in California and Wyoming and Colorado, etc.
Have you ever fallen?
Have I ever fallen?
Yeah.
Like in the kitchen?
Try to pay attention, Don, here. Focus. It has to do with mountains.
Everybody falls. Trips. Actually, parallel to mountaineering was rock climbing, which is roped kind of stuff, and that I never got very good at, but really loved it. And the main thing is the technical protection things, so that falling is just part of it. You push yourself till you fall, and then you know your limitations. So falling is not a problem because you're protected, unless the idiots that do free climbing these days that I just don't understand. So of course I've fallen,
yeah,
but I've never. Did I ever get hurt falling? Maybe once. I might have sprained something when I slipped while we were practice climbing in Yosemite in the rain. I also fell once when we were looking in Pennsylvania while looking for some places to climb. Got to the edge of something and a big boulder came free, and I went over the edge with it and fell about 10 or 15 feet. My back was injured for quite a while.
oh.
Boy, are we drifting from topic.
That's no. This is all part of what makes you tick, man. So last question is from me is what would you like to be remembered for?
Being me, I don't know.
Being the epitaph. What are they going to put on your tombstone? Been there, done it?
Been there, done it. Damn it. One of the great things is I won't be around to have to worry about what's on my tombstone.
That's true. So it could be anything. Like I'm Mr. Wonderful.
I know there are certain things in square dancing that if people remember me, one will be writing out of sight and one will be creating Ferris wheel, but I don't know, being a good person.
Good. Yeah, I like that. Anybody else got any questions for Don now?
Do you speak any other languages than English?
English and square dancing, Hannah?
Yeah.
I grew up speaking English and German till I was about 3 years old. And then World War II broke out and I refused to speak German. And I regret having given it up at the time because I speak a very small amount of German now, very small. But I still understand most of it, and more than I expected, because I'm one of my mental image groups that just started is all Germans, and some of them don't speak English. We have an interpreter who's taken the course in English, and I'm surprised at how much I do understand, but almost German. I took Latin in school. That didn't do much for me.
A lot of help. E pluribus unum. Yeah. How do you talk in Latin in numbers? X I. I'm XVII years old. Wow. Anybody else?
Barry and Pam's hand are up.
Oh, there it
One
is.
hand
Yes.
people.
Okay.
Hi,
Yes.
hi, Don. I'm curious. What couple of things? How long did you call for Tech Squares, and how did it come about that Tech Squares got to count as a PE credit for MIT?
I started a group. Just a little background. I started this group of dancers, Bill Mann and myself and my ex-wife at MIT for about a year and a half. And at that time I was in graduate school, and that was taking a lot of extra time as well as a full-time job. And my father had just passed away, and there were a lot of extra responsibilities there. And we were collecting a quarter a head, and that wasn't paying for my gas to drive 45 minutes into Cambridge. So I decided after a year and a half that I really had to stop. One of the dancers in the group had been a Western square dancer in the Baltimore area, actually two of them, and she decided we can't let this thing die. At the time, we had the room under the auspices of the MIT Outing Club. And so she and one of the other dancers took the group and formed Tech Squares, formalized the group that we had, and got the room under the auspices of a school club called Tech Squares. And she went on to be a cure, very active, as Veronica McClure. So I called for them for about a year and a half, and then somebody named Tex Wilson took over for a while, and he didn't stay too long. I think wife pressures were either he or they, he or the club, she or the club. And then they hired Dennis Marsh, and he called for many years. And then they asked me, some of the ones asked me when I was more established as a caller at the time, because I learned a lot in those first year and a half doing patterns. They asked me if I would be willing to teach them A1. So Dennis was still calling on Tuesdays, and I did Thursdays, teaching A1 with a smaller room that they got because of Tech Squares, and then eventually teaching A2 and C1 and C2. And they eventually decided that Dennis was not the right caller for them, for reasons that I won't get into here. And they, and I was dancing, playing a very tricky balance thing, Pam, as far as not wanting to replace Dennis, not wanting to make enemies. And they asked me if I'd be willing to take over the club. And I said, no, it's Dennis's club. And eventually they said, you don't understand. We're getting rid of Dennis. Somebody's got to replace him. Do you want to do it? And so I said, yes. So that's when I became club caller again. And I stayed with them. And I don't remember what year that was, but I stayed club caller until we moved to the island, to Martha's Vineyard 26 years ago. And probably 9 or 10 years that I was caller for them at that point. And still doing the advanced and challenge stuff for the small subgroup that wanted to. And when I gave them notice, they went out and did a search committee and looked for callers, and they come up with this young kid that didn't have much experience, named Why can I never remember his name? The guy they have now, what's his name?
Oh, Ted
Ted
Lazai.
Lazar,
Yeah,
yeah.
Ted. I can never remember poor Ted's name. They came up with Ted to do, and I thought, okay, he sings well, but boy, has Ted grown into that position. He's done a fantastic job with him, and he's grown a lot being there. And they made the right decision, even though I didn't understand it at the time. Not that I had anything against Ted. I knew Paul better, but Ted has really grown into it and does a great job. And when I look at the numbers, it blows me because I think I'm Tech Square's caller. Ted's been there a lot more years than I have. And at their 50th anniversary dance, I was lucky enough that I suggested, and they did. I've got some good pictures of Ted, myself, and Dennis Marsh, the three long-term callers for the club. But
Nice. So
is
how
that-
did it become that they could get a phys ed credit by dancing at Tech Squares? I know it was because MIT is a land grant college and a phys ed credit was required to graduate. So how did Tech Squares, and square dancing get to become a phys ed credit?
I knew there was a second part to your question, and I don't know I don't know the answer to that, Pam. It happened shortly after I left when Ted was there.
Okay.
It was probably some smart members of the club trying to figure out how to get more people. At the time, we had a lot of people, and they probably still have a lot of people that aren't MIT students or faculty. But the school required that in order to get a room, you have to have at least 50% of the group being school related. I don't know, some clever people in there went approached the phys ed department and talked them into it, I guess, but it was a great move.
Yeah. I mean,
done
I've asked Clark about it, and I've asked Ginda about it, and they don't, even Clark doesn't really know, when it started and how it came about. And, my sort of the history and what everything in me wants, I'm curious about it. It's, so I don't know if anybody knows at this point. It's lost.
Do you know Ron Hoffman? He's a dancer there and works it there and has been there since forever. Ron might know. Do you know Stephen Gilday, C4 dancer out in
Yes.
California?
Yes.
Stephen,
Not well, but I do know Stephen. Yes.
Stephen might know. Stephen was there around that time.
Okay.
He might know.
It's a great club. I did get to go one. I was in the area one Tuesday night on my own and just showed up. Ted was like, "What are you doing here?" And it was a great night. I had a great time.
I'm amazed how many people around the country and world have, you say Tech Squares and they know what you're talking about. It's become quite an institution.
Well, MIT graduates have sort of, spread themselves all over the world, and wherever there's dancing, those that still dance, they find dancing and they'll show up with their Tech Squares badge or shirts or something, and people ask. So, no, it's quite an institution.
And I know when I was calling there, most of the other clubs that you did classes for, other people did classes for, when their classes graduated and they went out to dance at other clubs, you sort of huddled around them to protect your little chicks that they wouldn't be disappointed and discouraged. Whereas with Tech Squares, even though they only had 13 lessons, you hope they wouldn't get too bored while dancing the new graduates. And it wasn't only MIT type of brains that were learning that quickly. It was the people coming in that were just part of the culture and still is. It's I'm proud to have been part of that.
Okay,
Lee, are you still around?
We've got a
Joe, can I ask a question?
right after Stephen. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Go
When
ahead,
did you say you're gonna put your book out again? Because I just finished Jay King's and I'm looking forward to reading yours.
Have I got you on the list, Stephen? I've got a list of people. I'll put you on to notify when it does come out.
You got me on your mailing list, on your email list for the Zoom.
For Zoom. Let me write a note to put you down for the book too.
Okay.
Done.
If I can just convince my wife to let me get it.
Have no idea what the prices are with a different printer. I'm hoping to hold them the same, although postage prices have gone up, especially for out of the US. I suspect within a couple of weeks or within a month or so, things keep getting in the way, but I've decided to print it the same way it was and decided to use online printers instead of a local printer for economic reasons, I think, but hopefully soon.
Okay. Eileen?
Yeah, I'm just interested. You said that you were the creator of the Ferris wheel. That to me was quite interesting. Can you tell me more about that and why you called it the Ferris wheel?
Yes, I can, if you guys want to hang around for that. And not the actual Ferris wheel. The actual Ferris wheel was created in Chicago by a guy named George Washington Ferris, who went to the same college I did and graduated 100 years before I did. When I was, we're talking 63. So how long had I been calling? No, we're talking 74. I don't know, maybe calling 10 years. All these new calls were coming out and coming out and coming out. And my feeling was we didn't need new calls. There was still plenty we could be doing with the stuff we've got. And of course, everybody still thinks that, and they're right. But I was in the Chicago area on business, engineering business, and staying with my in-laws, and had a 1-hour drive to work. And while I was driving down the highway, I remember thinking, we don't need all these new calls, but if I were going to create a new call, what would I do? And I saw Ferris wheel in my mind and I got excited. So I named it Shuffle and Deal, because it's sort of like a wheel and deal, but you're shuffling one side of the deck to the other. And told several people about it. Some challenge dancers said, where's the shuffle? Well, I had looked in Burleson and saw that, geez, there were 6 or 7 shuffles already. What's the difference between 7 or 8? Little did I know the challenge dancers just used one of those. But I had sent it out. So I sent what you did with new calls at the time was you wrote them up, the definition and some examples, and sent it out to 6 note services. And Bill Peters from California, who later became a good friend, but this is the first time we spoke, called me on the phone and he said, I like your new call, Don. I've noticed nobody's published it yet. I'd like to publish it, but I said, but you don't like the name. And he said, yeah, you're right. And I said, I hadn't thought of anything else. What? I guess I could name it. He said, do you mind if I add a suggestion? Oh, are you waving to Yolanda is going goodbye? Is that what it is, Joe?
I was waving to Di.
Oh, okay.
Di's on her way.
Anyway.
Thanks, Don. Thanks, Joe. Bye.
Bye, Di. Bill said, well, do you mind if I suggest a name? And I said, go ahead. And he said, well, how about calling it Step Ahead? And I said, no, Bill, that's not a winner. It won't stick with that name. I said, how long do I have to come up with a new name? This is probably more than you wanted, Eileen, but it's the story behind it. How long do you have? And he said, oh, I'm not going to publish this till next week. And I said, okay, I'll think of a new name. And I'm thinking it's sort of like a couple circulate and wheel and deal. I'll call it Circus Wheel. No, that's not a winner. I'll call it Ferris Wheel. And that's where the name came from. And 2 things as a result. One is most, if you think about it, the names of almost all calls are verbs, and Ferris wheel is one of the few that's a noun. Which I didn't think of at the time, but it struck me as being weird since then. And I frequently call it ride a Ferris wheel. And two, as much as I thought we didn't need new calls, that one went to my head. And then my creativity exploded after that. And I came up with lots of others.
That was really great. Thank you for that.
Okay.
Somebody in England very recently has written me an email wanting to know about a similar story about ping pong circulate. I will be writing that up soon.
Wow.
Sorry to interrupt, Joe.
No, that's okay. Yeah, we're going to close her down for the time being, and want to thank Don very much for.
Mickey's got his
Mickey,
hand up.
Yeah. Hi. I got a question. When did you start with the coaching?
I think, by the way, those you don't know, Mickey's in Germany, and I first met him when he was a student at a school I was teaching over there with Al Brundage.
Al Stevens.
Yeah, Al Stevens, thank you. And I hadn't seen Mickey for years, and he's resurfaced, or I've resurfaced in the last few years. It's been great getting to know you again, Mickey. When did I start coaching? The caller school I went to, the first one I went to was with Jim Mayo, and it was a once a week for many, many weeks. And after I'd graduated and such, well, I graduated, finished the school. I'd gotten more and more into the mental image stuff. And Jim asked me if I'd be willing to come up and do one of his sessions on mental image. And I said, Jim, I'd love to, but there's no way I can teach it in one night. How about letting me do a half-hour session each night of your class? And he said, of course, I can't pay you for that. I said, that's all right. I'll just have fun teaching it. Just pay me for one of them and I'll come up anyway. And so I was doing that, and that's probably, Mickey, where just teaching that was the first part of it. And then I got to realizing I mentioned Jim was one of my mentors, the main one, I'd say, not in the usual sense of looking over my shoulder and telling me what to do. But one of the things he said at the end of his school is, one of the benefits of being this school is you get my phone number. And if you ever want to call me and ask a question, it's good for life. And so I took him up on it, and we eventually became pretty good friends and discussed a lot of problems and involved a lot of explanations of what's going on with body flow and timing and tempo over the years. And so it was probably as a result of first teaching the mental image part of his class, and then just getting together with him and doing other things, and finally making presentations at our local Callers Association. And then eventually running my own caller school. Actually, boy, you got me blabbering here. I was at Caller Lab once and walking down the hall, and I ran into Daryl Clendenin. He said, come to my room, we're going to have some scotch. I think it was scotch. And I said, what's the occasion? He said, I just took the Caller Lab accredited caller coach test, and I need to unwind. And there were, that was a year or two or three after they started, where all the big name people had become coaches. And Daryl was part of the second. Actually, I think Kip Garvey was part of the next wave, but Daryl was shortly after. And again, I figured, well, if Daryl can do it, so can I. And so I got to studying. I guess even before that, when they were coming up with the list of questions for caller coaches, they'd ask me, come up with 3 or 4 questions about mental image that caller coaches should know. So I had contributed. Unfortunately, when I took the test, I didn't get any of those questions. It would have been easy to answer.
That's cool. I also met Jim Mayo on a school. It was, I think, the second or third school after the one I joined with Al Stevens. And yeah, very big impressions by the two of you. Very, very cool.
I asked Jim once, how come when I try to figure out how to do something and I ask one caller, he said, well, I do this, and if it works for you, do that. But when I ask you, you explain to me how to do it, and it actually works. That your explanation helps me do it. And he says, because basically I'm a dummy, and if I've been able to teach this dummy, I can teach anybody. Jim was an amazing teacher, and as well as having lots of knowledge and being open to new thoughts, was able to pass them on and share them, as well as his very obvious leadership things.
Yeah, very much was his statement to have everybody dance and with body flow, whatever. And he said when he was over in Germany, he said, man, you know, that's one thing. Your callers really can dance. And even if you call bad body flow, you know, they even make it look good. Yeah.
Alrighty. Well, thank you all for being on this session, and we want to thank Don again for consenting to let us peek into his past. Thanks,
Thanks
Don.
for the opportunity, Joe. Thank you guys for coming.
Okay. Next week is Larry Letson, and if you don't know Larry, don't want to miss it. Larry is a goof. He is. he's got stories galore, and he can tell them well. You know, so far. In fact, I think he said something about he thought about writing a book, Don, about how to be a retired square dance caller. Yeah, something like that. So
He did mention something about getting out of the spotlight was
yeah.
jarring to his system and worth.
So anyhow, you know, it'll be good. So we'll see you next week, hopefully, and I'll see you this week, Don. Okay, take care, everybody.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Joe.
Thank
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Y'all take care.
Take
Bye
care.
bye.
Bye, everybody.